sonic branding is supremely important. And having an audio logo is a really hard thing to get right. But if you get it wrong, you'll know. And that's something that we've seen a lot more of. And I think it's got, like, whether it's Netflix doing it more recently, or you've seen a lot of brands like Liberty Mutual, like more recently, like it jumped into the insurance. Well, they had to compete with Nationwide, State Farm, and Farmers, who have, like, really kind of well-formed, sonic strategies and audio logos. So, like, those things are super important. And I think the great companies go beyond. They take a sonic strategy, and the audio logo is just part of that strategy. So, like, we partner with, like, Made Music Studio on the Pepsi logo, or the Tostitos one, and that kind of stuff. I think is starting to get more credibility. But now, like, research is part of that equation. Like, if you're serious about doing sonic strategy or audio logo today with one of the major agencies, they're not going to pitch you without research in that pitch. And like, it's amazing. Like, in 2015, it was like not even being taken. The audio logo itself was barely being taken seriously. Now in 2023, like, no one who's worth their salt is going to come to you and talk to you about a sonic strategy without having testing being part of it.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Optimization is something that we're all doing all the time in marketing. So I'm super excited to be chatting with Scott Simonelli, who started Veritonic, excuse me. So we'll start with what the catalyst was, Scott. So I know you've been in optimization longer than just Veritonic. So what was the catalyst for you deciding to come back to optimization?
Yes, no, thank you. Great to be here, Kevin. The crossroads happened really from my first career, which I've been working on since I was a child, which is music composition, and written music for a lot of different things, and actually met the co-founder of Optimist, Mark Watkin at Sony Music. Or really, he's the founder of Optimist, and Optimist is his idea. So, but we started doing A/B testing in 2002, 2001 after I left Sony Music, and so did Mark, along with our CTO, Lance Levette. And I was still writing a lot of music for TV ads. And while I was learning so much about multivariate testing and just not just the experimental design or the regression analysis or statistical significance or all these different factors that make it interesting, but just like the fact that, you could show a click here button or a submit button or a click now button and see small things make big differences, and you could have real data to back that up. And as a composer, I would sit there and there was no way we were making the decisions that way as related to the music I was going to put in your TV ad. And around about, I think, 9 months into Optimist, maybe about a year, one of our first clients was Bank of America, and we were doing multivariate testing on their mortgage application forms. But I also just coincidentally was working on an ad for a B of A national TV spot, and got into an argument about whether it was heartfelt or melancholy. And then I was like, you know what? None of us in this room are in the target demographic for this ad. And if we only had some data to back this up, I know that I'm right. I just wanted to be right, like anybody else. But that's when the light bulb went off. Is like, why can't we apply this type of optimization, this type of testing, this type of statistical rigor to what people hear? And that really stuck with me because it's one of those entrepreneurial stories where you have just two really unique crossroads, right? Those are multivariate testing and music for TV ads that don't usually cross each other. And I just happened to be in that seat, and that was really the genesis for Veritonic in the early 2000s. And then in 2015, I felt like it was the right time for me in my career to start a company, and that was something that had been something I'd been passionate about for a long time, and felt like there was a lot there because audio is such a powerful thing, and it's such a strong impact on our visceral responses and immediate responses as well as long-term memory. I'm like, there's something there. The question is, can we uncover it, and can we do it in a scalable way? And felt like it was the right time to do it. we were early, like a lot of those things are. In 2015, there were no AirPods. Smart speakers really didn't exist yet. What's a podcast was what you would have been asked if you said, if you mentioned a podcast in 2015. So, digital audio advertising and kind of audio first experiences as a secular story didn't exist yet. So that's the genesis for Veritonic, is that can we quantify human response to sound? Can we help marketers and advertisers understand how audio is impacting everything that they do, right? Everything that matters to them, every metric that matters to them, from a customer communication and really audio advertising standpoint. And so that's the genesis there. But it's a long story, probably 10 years in the incubator before we did it. And we were still a few years early. And frankly, we're still early now, and it's still a relatively immature market.
Well, I guess it's interesting because, audio is consumed and audio advertising is consumed in so many different places. And I would imagine that, one's reaction to audio may be somewhat different depending on where you are consuming it, which of course confounds testing a little bit, right? So if I'm in my car listening to a podcast and hearing an ad in that environment, that may be different than if I'm in the gym and I'm listening to it, as I'm working out. And there may be other more relaxing environments, or maybe in a work context for B2B podcast and its advertising. So how do you deal with the consumption environment? And is that in fact a big difference, or is it pretty much if the person's paying attention, their responses are the same?
You know this, optimization and testing well, so you're already hitting on a lot of them. That is a big difference, and there are others, but the fragmented nature by which audio is consumed was one of the first things that we thought of as well. In that, the internet is fantastic from a testing standpoint. That it's relatively linear, right? You can still be influenced by a lot of other factors, and attribution is always a bit of a dark art in science. But you click and you buy, even from a Google search to a purchase, it can be a relatively linear process from where from the user experience standpoint. Even if it happens over a long period of time, all those interactions happen there. And so, audio, to your point, it can be in the car, it can be in the gym. You can't track a click, in that way, right? Certainly not while you're driving, but either way, you have to kind of manufacture the audience, and you have to be significantly more equipped in predicting how things are going to happen. And now, granted, we're starting the company pre-generative AI as well here. Right? AI was sort of a negative, I think, when we were first starting the company, in that you're asking people to take two leaps, one on black box, artificial intelligence, and the other on I've never measured audio before. So, that's always difficult. So what we really tried to do in starting the Veritonic platform and our software was figure out a way to leverage human responses at scale. So things like neuro insights and brainwave studies and those sort of things are interesting, but they don't scale across large populations. And then we had to sort of manufacture the audience, right? Because you're going to have to deal with some way of kind of farming those responses, and the paradigm we were existing in and still existing today is the focus group, right? It's okay, well, if I need to find this out and I can't do it by track and click, I'm going to go ask 300 people, and then there's a whole host of just inherent flaws in that model. So it was, how can we find that way to manufacture the audience, have them experience audio in a random distribution of context as best we can, standardize the way we track their responses, make sure that we're looking at things across time series, because audio and time are ultimately married. They can't exist without each other. It's not like an image, you don't know how long somebody's gonna look at it, but audio is tied to time, just at the hip. So then we standardize that and say, okay, we are gonna survey people. We're gonna build that into the system. It's gonna be global. It's gonna be totally scalable, and it's not gonna be something the end user has to worry about. And then over time, we're gonna use machine learning, artificial intelligence, use these methodologies to ask enough people in a standardized way so we can start to think we know the answer already. So when Kevin hears something that sounds like this in this random set of circumstances, he's likely to feel this way in the moment, and this way before and after, and this way over time. And then we can contextually kind of target those experiences. And then now with tracking and digital audio, we can fuse in actual, who heard this podcast when they clicked and that sort of stuff, and fuse that into that. We didn't have that in 2015. So, we're getting there on that, but it's a long way of saying is you've got to be really good at predicting how somebody's going to feel when they hear something. And you have to have a software platform that can experience audio like a person. And it took us about 4 years to get to where that even started to become something. But it doesn't mean you don't have a business there, right? You're better than everything else. You're just not as scalable yet. But we're getting there today, and it's exciting to see all those things come together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would seem that obviously one other way in which one is consuming audio is when you're consuming it at the same time as video, right? So where do you guys fit in that context? Because now, to some extent, the visual element confounds the measurement, but also enhances the ability to get emotional trigger, right? Because emotion is tied in very tightly to music, but if the visual sense, can enhance that. So are you also sort of deploying in parallel against when you want to do understand the visual?
We should have called you in 2015. You're literally like, you could have been in our angel now. So it's exactly right, because as you point out, the genesis for me came from music in the context of video. Right, I wasn't thinking about my gripe was not only did I want to be right, but it was like, wait, you're spending 90% of the budget, and you're using Millward Brown and Kantar to do focus groups, and you don't even ask if they like the audio or whatever. 90% of your research is on the visual.
Yeah.
But it's probably the other way around. It's certainly, at the very least, the audio matters. The question is how much. You're not looking at it at all.
Right.
You probably spend nothing on the music. You probably use stock audio. The voiceover was the person sitting next to the marketing person's desk, and whatever. And we went to countless organizations and saw that. And for 3 or 4 years, that was our entire business. Was like, audio's not getting a fair shake here. And so our platform supports video. And we still do, we work with, video clients today. And it's just a bit of a different methodology, because you have to account for the fact that the video is there.
Yeah.
But ultimately, and it wasn't until about 2018, 2019, when we were overwhelmed by the incoming requests for audio's first experiences. Because at that point, people were just starting to maybe throw some money on the outside on some podcasts. And it was more like people were listening to podcasts and then thought, oh, maybe I could advertise on those. Then smart speakers, and then AirPods, and then it just tipped over. By 2019, like the percentage of things we were being asked to do, the research people were using our platform for, like the amount of audio first experiences started to just multiply faster. And frankly, there's less friction for us. We still do music in the context of video, and it's still a part of our business, but ultimately, you don't have to have as much of the fight when it's only audio.
Right.
and now with the way podcast advertising works and digital audio advertising works, we have a lot of the plumbing in place to just do that, because we're basically web analytics. We're research, but then we're also like web analytics for audio as well. So Veritonic is more like Omniture was, versus Optimist.
Right.
So Optimist, as just for those people who don't know who might be listening, Optimist is an A/B testing company. Omniture was web analytics. And so, when I looked at starting Veritonic, one of the things I was also adamant about was we cannot be a point solution. Like audio research analytics is, if we can be a point solution, but we should establish those points and then look to expand beyond them, because there's more here than that. Omniture built their business just as fast as Optimist built ours, and they were worth $5 billion, and we did great, but we were not. They saw something bigger, and I thought audio deserved at least somebody to take a crack at that. And it's it's a different mentality. Not to say that we've got it all under control either, but it's not that we're not trying.
Sure. So, it's interesting because podcast advertising and, even video advertising that includes audio tracks is generally considered mid to upper funnel. But of course, there's also VSL ads, and there's, infomercial style direct response advertising. So typically when you're working with clients and or agencies, what are the KPIs that they're obviously sales in the end is the final KPI, and that's like the nirvana of KPIs, but you've got all these little steps from brand awareness to the true understanding of the brand and purchase intent and all those sort of branding style metrics. And then you bridge over into more direct response style metrics of changes in behavior. So where do you fit all the way along that full sort of funnel of measurement and analytics, or do you find that generally when somebody's coming to you, they are like this preconceived notion, like, okay, here's my KPI, that's the one I'm focused on?
Yeah, that burden's on us, right? Like ultimately, there's two things happening. One, we have to look at the canon of what people are using to measure now, right? Because they're coming from somewhere.
Yeah.
It's usually digital or whatever, but they're going to look at return on ad spend. They're going to look at conversion rate. They're going to look at incremental lift. They're going to look at all the metrics you'd expect, and they're going to try to translate that to what is the audio version of that. Some of it is apples to apples, and some of it is apples to pears or whatever. Sometimes it's like Golden Crisp versus a Fuji, right? So like ultimately, but that's one of our biggest challenges, frankly, is one, establishing. We're still at a phase where no one will tell you that data doesn't matter. Like data-backed optimization is absolutely essential. Confidence from executives in making decisions is essential. Like efficacy is essential. Having an advantage over your competitors and benchmarking is essential. These are all things, and improving. No one's going to say no to any of that. But the world of audio does not have yet that kind of expectation. In the way, like you and I saw, like we talked about earlier, we're both old enough to know when I had log files, I didn't have web analytics, or I don't care if I do A/B testing or not. I'm not going to bother with that. And then 7 years in, it was like if you weren't doing A/B testing, you get fired. Right? Today, audio is still in that place where people are trying to figure out the right version or kind of what the vernacular is for audio and those metrics and how they fit into their overall media mix and the other things they do advertising wise. But two, just some flat out credibility. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, you're not doing attribution, brand lift, creative optimization, and understanding all, return on ad spend, and ROI and all the other factors, right? And if you're not doing testing, then you're going to get fired, right? Like audio is not like kind of in that of course phase. It's in no one will disagree with you, but it's not in the it's more the vitamin than the painkiller, but it's getting better every day. And these kinds of conversations will get a lot of head nods, and eventually, as more money and more dollars flow in to digital audio, that will continue to improve as well as the stakes get higher.
Cool. Yeah, I have one particular use case difference comes to mind, which is the sort of audio in relation to a skippable video ad unit versus audio in a non-skippable podcast environment, right? When you're designing creative for a skippable like YouTube style environment, right, you really have to make sure you get that first 2 or 3 seconds just right. The hook visually and from an audio perspective needs to be really strong. Is that equally important in a podcast environment where it's not skippable and it's hard coded into it, or is it actually quite different depending on that really quite different usage environment, right? Because if something is skippable, the consumer's ability to skip it, right, changes the whole dynamic of consumption.
Yeah, and look, there's lots of different ways you can gate these things. It's a little harder to skip audio, or impossible in some cases, but ultimately people, the data that we see, people just skip less. And it's a different type of experience. It's in your ear versus just like here, or you're in the car where you're, a little riskier proposition to skip. Even if you can. Although I'll admit, like I listen to, there's one podcast I know the first 3 minutes is going to be, just ads back to back, and I'm like trying to do this, drive off the road. But ultimately, the nature of audio itself, the way it's consumed, is just more conducive to somebody experiencing an ad, and we're still, and the medium is still learning the right way to do that. In the same way that, ad I'm sure we remember when pop-up blockers came out, or when this was going to come out, and like, and then YouTube's gone through, generations of how they do ads, right? We're whatever 20 years into it, however long YouTube's been around. So, ultimately the industry will have to find that out. But the one thing I will say is, as a medium, audio is got a lot of advantages. And I think we'll continue to learn the right way to do it. But I think one thing we're really fighting for is to compare audio to other things that you do from a media standpoint. And dollars for dollar, would an audio ad yield a higher ROI than a YouTube ad or a YouTube campaign, right? And so like those things aren't getting compared to each other very well right now.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's where I think, in the same way that the internet had this advantage. At first, it was like unclear, and then people started to realize how much money they could make and how easy it was to buy things online. Like there was, I could sell shoes online, whereas I didn't think I could before. I think with audio, like there will be these things where like, wow, when I do compare this, it does work, and there is enough inventory in podcasting, and this is something. They will start to figure that out. But our data has been really telling so far, and we're going to continue to tell that story. And it's not just a Veritonic specific thing. I think anybody who's looked at audio advertising in the aggregate is seeing a lot of benefits, and that's really just the power of audio and the nature of the format.
So are there any industries that have particularly interesting stories from the perspective of not just comparing your video and display and audio, and have audio outperforming because the combination of price and effectiveness, right? Because at the right price, it's, it gets even more valuable from an ROI perspective. But any industries, that pop out where you guys were particularly impressed with just your ability to iterate within the audio channel and improve from wherever the baseline was?
Yeah, I mean, look, we have a diverse set of customers, and a diverse set of experiences, which again, it's a curse and a blessing sometimes. Like you're doing the music in a TV ad, when you're doing someone's audio logo, when you're doing someone's podcast voiceover, when you're doing a functional sound that the noise that their device makes. So we get a lot of it, and there's success stories in all those areas and more. I think the interesting thing, look, it's no secret that direct response advertising has had a lot of success on podcasts. In some ways, it was made for DR, right? Like it's like, okay, I'm going to get this kind of lower cost ad format, and I'm going to drive a direct response. And whether that's, you see it everywhere from like BetterHelp or Athletic Greens or these other brands are just like, and then you also have like celebrity endorsements, which work really well for DR. Or kind of, any kind of endorsement is a DR, whether it's proactive or all these different things. They have celebrities or whatever. And but then the podcast host reading an ad, so host read ads, can work really well. So it's really a perfect storm for DR. And the only thing it didn't have was a good attribution model.
Right.
And now that's been established over the last couple of years by us and others, now it continues to drive podcast advertising. And DR, podcast advertising and DR are really a match made in heaven. What we're seeing more now is the brand advertisers who have real budget. Right now, they're looking for different metrics. They don't have that DR plumbing, that kind of model of just like, hey, I said this, I did an endorsement with Kevin endorsed my product and people clicked and I got that. They're looking for brand lift or brand awareness, and that's not something that can be tracked with a click. And that's been huge area for growth, and will continue, in the next, year and more to come for us. And looking at brand lift in particular, and we're seeing our Sonic branding clients who, we did like the Tostitos audio logo or the Cheetos audio logo for Pepsi, and they've done all this. They invested in Sonic branding. Now it's like, well, can that translate to audio advertising, and how does that affect my brand? And so we're starting to see large brands come in, and I think that's really what's going to drive the next wave in growth in podcast and digital audio advertising. Our brand advertisers, because now they have a way to measure success, whereas 3 years ago they really didn't. Right? If you wanted to do brand lift 3 years ago, you had to go to a traditional provider, and you were back in the focus group hole. As now you can get into, is there an audio version of brand lift, and I think it's really exciting because brand advertisers can now combine that, right? They can have a Sonic strategy, right? Which is what we've been talking about since 2015, which is I did sonic branding. I've got a palette, just like I have a visual palette and copy that I use. I've got my sonic strategy, and then I can deploy this over everywhere I use sound. And I can look at podcast ads next to TV ads, next to YouTube, and then really understand how my investment in audio is yielding value. And that's just, those pieces are like just starting to come together in a way that larger brands will start to understand them. And that's success. That's the most exciting success story for me. I think the DR stuff has been a huge success story, but it sort of makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that like brands were later to the internet. Like a lot of people had, like would Pepsi have had the first person to have a website that was meaningful? Probably not. Right? It was somebody who was like probably someone selling books, right? Amazon, right? Like it was very DR minded, right? It wasn't Pepsi. And I think audio is going to have a similar trajectory. But look, brands have a lot of budget and they have large audiences, so I think that'll come.
So I'd love to have you comment a little bit on the sonic branding. I've always been a big proponent of some level of sonic branding, whether it's a full jingle or something as simple as a multi-tone, entree, a logo, something goes along with your logo from an audio perspective. So maybe not everyone knows the different levels of immersion that you can do, when you put together, because I hope some creative folks listening to us rethink, right? Like, okay, I left audio out of the equation altogether. I just, didn't even include it in the creative brief. I have to go back and I have to decide, do I want a full jingle? Do I just want to sort of, attach a sound or a series of notes to the logo? Like, what do I want to do?
Yeah, it's as a huge part of our business, especially when it was like, that first, when we were doing a lot of music for TV and sonic branding, and sonic branding was having, it's in a decent place now from where it was in 2015, which in 2015 it was no, oh, you mean jingles? It was almost like that. That's ridiculous concept, like Cars for Kids ad. This stuff works, right? Like there's a reason Nationwide and Farmers and every insurance company, right? Like has these audio logos. They've been around for a long time, and they have to compete directly in a very commoditized market. So like the fact is, like, sonic branding is supremely important. And having an audio logo is a really hard thing to get right. But if you get it wrong, you'll know. And that's something that we've seen a lot more of. And I think it's got, like, whether it's Netflix doing it more recently, or you've seen a lot of brands like Liberty Mutual, like more recently, like it jumped into the insurance. Well, they had to compete with Nationwide, State Farm, and Farmers, who have really kind of well-formed, sonic strategies and audio logos. So like those things are super important. And I think the great companies go beyond. They take a sonic strategy, and the audio logo is just part of that strategy. So like we partner with like Made Music Studio on the Pepsi logo, or the Tostitos one, and that kind of stuff. I think is starting to get more credibility, but now like research is part of that equation. Like if you're serious about doing sonic strategy or audio logo today with one of the major agencies, they're not going to pitch you without research in that pitch. It won't, and like it's amazing. Like in 2015, it was like not even being taken. The audio logo itself was barely being taken seriously. Now in 2023, like no one who's worth their salt is gonna come to you and talk to you about a sonic strategy without having testing being part of it. Yeah, because there's no way like two people in a room can tell the difference between like an audio logo, or like you or I together trying to decide like something for a brand like Tostitos would be impossible. And so like they start to bring that stuff in now, and it's, I think that it's in a weird way sonic branding has more kind of research rigor to it than podcast advertising right now. Just because we've been working on that since 2016. Podcast advertising is still like less than 5 years old, and this stuff usually takes 5 to 10 years before people can wrap their head around it.
So if somebody is new to adding sort of audio branding to their ads, and they want to do, clearly the insurance companies have decided it might not be a full jingle, but it's going to be something recognizable, and it's going to be sort of a signature sound. How would they go about testing which signature sound is sort of on brand for them, right, before they would go ahead and invest $4 million or $40 million in it? And or can you take any, can you do E.T. and basically, like that movie, like take a few tones and just embed it in everybody's brain, regardless of what the tones are?
Yeah, well, also, the amount of money you put behind exposure, right? It can make a difference, right? Like, so there's having a good audio logo that sounds good and does have a high recall rate and is memorable and hits all the boxes from a testing standpoint. But then there's also, like, if you play the thing all the time, like something like Netflix has the advantage of just getting played every time somebody watches a show on Netflix or HBO, right? Like, you're gonna hear that. By the way, that's the only one I'll sing for you is HBO. Is just that's just getting a lot of exposure, right? So there's, is that a good audio logo, or has it just been played 1,000 times?
Exactly. Well, that's, I think, that's the $1 million question, right? Is can you make any audio sign on work just by putting enough money behind it, or are you better off sort of finding the perfect one and then putting the money behind it?
Yeah. Well, I think it is the latter. Ultimately, there are some things that are just more memorable. There are some things that are better at evoking a certain emotion. There are some things that are better at recall, right? Like, not all melodies are created equal. There's some you're going to remember 20 years from now, and there's some you're not.
Yeah.
No matter how many times you hear it. So ultimately, like, that's why we encourage people to, what we were getting is you get a lot of people who just test the crap out of it and then never look at it again. It'd be like if you were doing A/B testing, you tested 2 versions of something and then found, okay, B's better, and then you just left it like that for 5 years. There's no way, like, 5 years from now, like, something else is going to be different, or whatever. It's like, A could be better, but also this stuff changes over time. So you also want to benchmark it. So if somebody wants to get into sonic branding, look, there's some great specialty agencies out there that do this for a living. It's a lot harder than it looks. And you like anything else, you're going to hear the story about somebody who got lucky and, like, dropped the pen on their keyboard and that was their sonic logo. But, like, there's great agencies that do this. They will bring research to the table, and then it's something that you have to look at over time, just like you look at all the rest of your market. Right? State Farm doesn't have the same visual logo now that they did in 1920, and they actually have the same audio, but it's evolved. And same with Nationwide, and they've done different versions of it. Same with McDonald's, same with all these other people, and there's a lot to do there. But it's a living, breathing part of marketing and optimization, like anything else. And I think if you're good at marketing, if you're data driven, and you're always measuring outcomes, the audio logo is actually, and frankly anything audio, but an audio logo in particular, is a foundational piece of your marketing content that you should evaluate the same way you do everything else. And that's all. At the end of the day, that's the theme of part of our conversation here is audio is more powerful than everything else you do. Mm-hmm. Right now, we'd be happy if you just treated it like everything else. Right? Like, let's just get to baseline here, and then we can prove to you that it's more powerful than what you see. We can prove to you it's more powerful than what you read. Nobody, my mentor when I was writing jingles and writing music, Carl Westman and Ogilvy, he always said, nobody hums the copy. And then there's something to be said for that. And but right now, I think from a data standpoint, from an analytics and research standpoint, audio just needs to get on par. And then when you start to measure it in the mix with everything else, there are areas where it's going to stand out, areas where it's not. But let's get it up in there and let's see how these things work together.
So it's the holiday season now when we're recording this, and obviously a lot of advertisers will sort of borrow audio tracks using holiday themed music, much of which is not currently copyright protected anymore, and so they feel like, oh, this is an easy way out. Is that what people want to hear? Is that going to get the response, or is actually, I have sometimes a visceral negative reaction if I've been overexposed to certain holiday tunes? So I'm curious as to what the research shows.
Yeah, I think well, look, the holiday music, like anything with audio, because it's powerful, it's with great power comes great responsibility. And anything that like people are going to love, some people might hate, right? And that's where targeting always comes into play,
Yeah.
right? But ultimately, look, people on the average, right, in the data that we've seen, they like hearing holiday themed ads. Works more often than it doesn't. The voice matters, and it can influence outcomes. And I think having holiday themed sounds, holiday themed music, holiday themed voice, that's data that we have that can make a difference. Even holiday themed sound effects and sound design can have a positive influence. So that's all data that we see in the aggregate. There's going to be the one person who's like, the Grinch, or they might not celebrate that holiday, right? Like, it's not everybody. Sometimes in middle America, people think everybody celebrates Christmas or things like that, and it's not always the case. And so, but in the aggregate, it does seem to have a positive effect in the data that we have, and and some of these things, are consistent across all ads. Like for example, ad duration, and like the way like you use sound design or where you run ads. Like some of that stuff just is good practice anyway. Celebrity voiceovers can generally be positive, like that works in the holidays as well. And then some verticals that really stand out, travel, health and fitness, and beauty products and home improvement. Those those could just be strong categories in general. But ultimately, around the holidays, it's working for audio, works with audio as well. So I think like the short answer is, try to embrace the holidays. It's a festive time. Use audio that supports that, and you run the risk of maybe offending some of your audience, but in the aggregate, it's probably going to work. But again, like anything else, if you test it, you'll know and react.
So, well, last question, really, 2024 is going to be another one of those big political spending years. And, there's use of candidate voices, both use of a voice and use of the opposing candidate's voice, especially if they make a faux pas or say something stupid. And there's plenty of that to go around all over the place at the moment. So, as someone potentially advising political advertising at the PAC level or at the candidate level or at the party level, any best practices with regards to audio and political advertising?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's one thing that I learned. One of my big lessons from Veritonic, because I came to it from the music point of view, was, man, the power of the human voice. And it's really just been a big learning curve for me, just in the way we've built our technology and our methodologies. Yeah, it's just like, man, it matters what you say. What you say is important, but how you say it is just makes such a huge difference. And people's response to a voice, especially when there's AirPods in your ear, or you're alone in the car, it's got a lot of pop behind it. And in the political realm, the opportunity, right, like to hear the candidate talking is a huge one. I mean, if you really think about it, how often, like I can't listen to, I watch a debate, it's like you get uncomfortable, you're like, who's sitting through that stuff? Like here you are, someone's got AirPods in, and all of a sudden you're right there talking to them. Like I'm a big audio, shocking, I'm a big audiobook person. I know that shocks you. But I listened to Barack Obama's book, for example, and he narrates it. And it was like, whoa, like you're hearing Barack Obama like in my ear for 23 hours, right? It's just like, but it's his book, so he's narrating this overwhelmingly positive experience. And just like hearing him talk that way in a way that I never experienced with him as president. In the 8 years he was president, I never had, I feel differently and feel more for him and for anybody who narrates, when the author narrates an audiobook, another example of this. When the author, because there's the way they are and how passionate they are about the topic really comes through.
Right.
So to answer your question, it absolutely matters. Candidates should be absolutely using their own voice. They should really be measuring and tracking and analyzing how they're speaking. And this isn't like slap an AI voice out there kind of thing. it's the space between the words you're saying. It's the delivery. This stuff matters big time, and yeah, it goes the other way. If you're going to play your opponent's voice, you could make them sound awful and evil and all those things. One thing we have noticed in audio advertising, though, and this isn't just political, mentioning competitors is a very risky proposition.
Yeah,
audio, because the memorability, you start to wonder who the ad's for, and you can start to like it can really start to mess things up. We see a lot, like one of our best practices in just podcast and digital audio advertising is be really careful about mentioning competitors in your ads. So that can go the other way on you really quickly. But I think the takeaway is really an opportunity for you as the candidate to communicate directly in the ear of a potential voter, and that should be treated very delicately and should be analyzed. And how you're speaking is much more important than what you're saying.
Cool. Well, those are all really great tips. Thanks so much, Scott, for joining me and awakening everybody to the power of audio and the importance of getting it right.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. Thank you for taking the time to speak today. I really enjoyed it.
Likewise.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.